This is part 3 in our terrain series for Winning with SketchUp, and I wanted to make a third part and touch on contour lines and just some quick tips and pointers when dealing with contour lines in general. So I have some contour lines here that were imported from AutoCAD and brought in, and this is generally how they come in. A lot of times the contour lines will be sitting up at their Z elevation, and we can see how those are sitting there. And I've lined these up with the house that I've modeled for this project, and this is really all I have from the survey. So I have the footprint of the house. Looks like we have some property lines, proposed driveway here, maybe some setback lines, and then these contours. So the first thing I'll generally do is get in to the contours here, and I'm going to put them on their own group for now so I can isolate them. So I'm going to select them all, group them, and now the other lines aren't getting in the way. And as I click on these, I can see that all of these sets of edges are broken. So we just have a series of disconnected edges here. They're not welded together. So one pointer that I would have, there's a really quick way to go through and weld all of these contour lines together at the same time. And that would be using the edge tools and using the simplify selected curves option. I'm going to select all of the contour lines, run this, and if we have a very complex set of curves for our contour lines, meaning that we would have a lot of vertices in each one of these, we can simplify them with this plugin as well. So if I would say OK, the plugin went through and it reduced all of those curves by, said 175 edges. And I'll undo that. We don't really have to go through and simplify them, but we can see, just for an example, if we did and I turned this up to maybe 2 feet, we can see that it reduced here by 280 edges, and I can undo that. We'll exaggerate that a little bit more and maybe go something like 5 feet, and you can see here when I hit undo and redo how that went through and simplified, and it actually cleaned up some areas as well. So there are some cases with contour lines where that would come in handy, and you don't really need all of that detail. So, but for now we're just going to leave things as they are, and we just want to weld these together. And the simplify curves option will actually weld. If we set this to 0, it won't change any of the it won't do any reduction on the segments, but it will weld each one of these together. So we can see it works kind of like a multi-weld operation. So it's a neat little trick there. You can go through and weld all of them at the same time. And now if we wanted to flatten these and bring these all to the same height, and maybe that was going to help us kind of position these and redraw some things. And a lot of times when we bring them in, we need to make our connecting points and the proposed contours versus the existing contours. So one quick way to flatten these out is to use the plugin Architect Tools. And I'm going to turn that on here. And this is from TomTom, so if you don't have this, it's worth getting. There's a couple in here that come in handy, but this flatten selection is probably what I use most. So if we hit that, that'll go through, and it dropped all of our contour lines down to the ground level. And now our entire plan is sitting on one level here. So we could grab everything and run that flatten again, and that'll make sure that everything is flat and sitting where we want it to be. There's also an option here for crop to selection, or crop selection to boundary. And if our contour lines are in a group, the way this works is we can go out, and if we didn't want the entire terrain, let's say, that we were working on, and we had a huge topographical survey, we could have a selection like this and select our contours in the group, run the crop to boundary, and that went through and cropped those edges down to, and we can see everything is still in a group here, but it just cropped everything to that square and that face that we selected first. So it's another little trick that comes in handy sometimes and may be necessary. Now we've flattened all of these, and let's say we went through and had these lined up where we wanted them, and we can get in here, and it looks like these were broken again after the flattening operation. So I'm going to go through and one more time do simplify, set to 0, and now we should all be welded back together. And there's a little bit of some lines here which represent the new terrain and the proposed terrain up around the house. I'm just going to delete those for now, and it's not really relevant to what we're going to go over, so I'm just going to erase those quickly. Connect a couple little points there, maybe erase this one, connect those, and all of these little weird pieces here, just going to go through and do that. And now if we wanted to lift these up and bring them up to the height they need to be, I noticed I had measured these ahead of time, and there was a 2-foot elevation in between contour lines. So in order to do this very quickly and very easily, we're going to use the plugin Step Extrude. And Step Extrude will allow us to preset a height, and here it is here, Step Extrude. So I'm going to preset the extrude height to 2 feet. And now I can go in and I can just click each one of these contour lines and being careful. And that went through and lifted all of them up by that 2 feet. And I can manually go and lift some of these up here. And there we go. We have our contour lines cleaned up, welded together, and lifted back up to the height that they needed to be. So when it comes to contour lines, generally there is either using the sandbox from contours, and we can see that I miss a couple spots down here, I think. And looks like that's broken again. I'm just going to weld this one more time. And for some reason that's giving us some weird divots in there. It's kind of stitching things in a little bit weird way overall. There's another option here that works well with certain contour lines, and this is the edge grid divide. So if we select our contour lines and we run that, you see this is set to a 1-foot increment. So we can bump this up to maybe 10 feet. And what's going to happen is we're going to divide these contour lines everywhere that it intersects with one of these grid points. So if we go ahead and double click, now what that did is it created some divisions here, and we can run this again with our sandbox tool, and sometimes we'll get a little bit of a better looking mesh overall. that looks like it just really made a mess here. So I'm going to undo the edge grid divide, and we can look at our divisions here. And we see that the divisions aren't great. And what we could do is run through, and we could use our BZ convert to and maybe do a polyline divider here, and maybe divide these up into 10-foot increments here. So I could select each one, and I have the polyline divider set to a shortcut. And what this will do is make these divisions a little more even overall, which will help create the terrain. And if you have a huge terrain, this can be a little bit tedious. And I can go through and do this relatively quickly because of the shortcuts here. And a couple over here. And now let's look at our vertices there, and we can see everything is a lot more even. So if we were going to use from contours now, get a much more evenly distributed mesh overall, and it would look a lot cleaner. We're still getting this drop down here. I'm guessing there's a point or something down here. Yep, there's an edge down here. So delete that edge, and we could run that again. And it should be nice and smooth now. It's actually a fairly good mesh overall, considering it's from contours that we're using here. So the other option is to use Topo Shaper, and we can run Topo Shaper, select our edges. Topo Shaper is the plugin from Frito 6, and we're going to hit Calculate Terrain. And that'll go through. There's two options here to adjust here. We can adjust our grid, and I'm just going to generate that. And we can turn a skirt on and off here. We can turn the contour lines on and off here. We can create a flat contour plan here. Contour map, or we can just hit the spacebar and commit to that. And we see we have a nice clean well divided mesh from those contour lines. And just for comparison, let's move this up here, and I'm going to grab all of these and run the sandbox. And we can drop this down here, and sitting on top of the sandbox, we can kind of see the difference here. Overall, they're fairly even as far as the height that they're sitting on. There's a little more detail in our Topo Shaper mesh, and we can really kind of pick up some of the undulation in the contour lines. So that worked out really well. So now that we have a good clean mesh, we also have the ability to sculpt this in a way that we couldn't do with from contours. So let me go back actually and grab this. And if we wanted to use a sculpting tool like Artisan, which is the paid plugin, or there's also the free sculpting tools here, which is called Sculpt Tools from BTM, and that's a free plugin that you can download for sculpting. Has a lot of the same sculpting features as Artisan, but Artisan is a lot more robust in what it does, and it gives you a lot more visual control over what you're sculpting. So I'm just going to use Artisan here. for the sake of demonstration. And if we go through and we try to start sculpting this, it's working. We're getting a decent sculpt here, but there's some areas in here where you just don't have an even distribution of points, and because the way that those divisions follow the contour lines, we don't have a smooth mesh either. And if we got over here, we see these long triangulations. They don't want to sculpt at all. Over here, we'll get a much better sculpt, and as soon as we get over here, we can't sculpt because we don't have the subdivisions to allow us to sculpt. So normally we'd have to go in and delete those edges anyway, but the difference here with our mesh from Topo Shaper is we can sculpt that, and we have a very nice clean sculpt anywhere we want to sculpt. So it's not just for sculpting, but another option here would be if we wanted to say we had a patio shape here, and I'm just going to pull a couple circles here, connect them with some arcs, and delete the center here. And let's just say we had a shape like this, and I'm going to bring this up here, make it into a group, bring it into our Topo Shaper mesh, and I'm going to go through and intersect this with context. And that went through and created a cutout there of our shape. And what I can do is go in with the Make Planar option of Artisan, and I'm going to set this to XY. And we can see what happened there, that we were able to, because we have a nice clean quad mesh, we're able to make that planar. I can even grab this interior here and lift this up on the blue axis until that's almost level there. And you can see if we maybe had a boulder wall or something going in around the outside, I can grab this center, group it, and I can even clean up here. And I'm going to run the plugin Fix-It 101, and that went through and got rid of all those coplanar edges. So now I just have a single surface here. You can see that's detached, and I can go in, and there's an option here to soften and smooth a selection. So I can do that, but it's going to actually start pulling away here. And I don't want that. So you can see it's starting to pull away from this shape here. So I'm going to have to select, double click, and then deselect the surface. Go in and crease those edges. So we're going to go to Crease Selection under Tools, Artisan, Crease Selection, and then we can go to Edges and Vertices and say OK. And now they won't move. They'll be locked in place. And I can grab this mesh here. I can start softening this if I want. And it's moving slowly but surely. There we go. I could even get in here with our sculpt brush, set that to smooth, and you can see we can go and smooth out the transition here and do that all the way around. I could get in here and sculpt this, lower our power, actually bring this up here, and then just grab this area if I wanted and smooth that out. Or again, just use our brush and go to smooth, make it a little bigger, a little stronger, and we can get in here and really smooth out those transitions there. Deselect everything. And really opens up some possibilities here to do some blending and blend, and we want a good clean mesh for that. So this works well with the soap, skin, and bubble methods, any of the sculpting. So when it comes to terrain and things, the Artisan plugin is a really handy plugin. So if we needed some more detail in a certain area, we could do that as well. We could grab a section and subdivide it. And now we've added some detail here. So we could get in and soften that, although, let's see, sometimes that'll start to pull away because it created extra edges there that aren't creased. And we can just re-texture this and see how nice that looks overall. So we've created our flat area here. This could be putting green, it could be a patio surface, that could be a maybe a spot for a shed or a playground, something along those lines that's sitting out, and maybe we don't have a wall around it, but we just have some terrain that's spilling away, maybe a trampoline that's recessed underground, any of those things. So just some options there with playing with the terrain that we've created from those contour lines. So I wanted to mention another tool that comes in really handy when it comes to drawing contours, or let's say adding on to contours, and you've already set your Z height, you've already established the elevation on these like we did here. Now if we wanted to add on to these, it can be tricky sometimes with the native SketchUp tools. They tend to want to snap to geometry below. So even if we we're trying to draw something here, and we were trying to draw our elevation, and we had something here underneath, you can see that sometimes those curves will not stay at that same Z height that we want them. So in order to do that, this set of tools comes in very handy, and this is the 2D tools. And what this does is it restricts all of these drawing tools. They all have a certain logic, and Tig wrote this plugin and kind of rebuilt the basic drawing set from scratch, and the main function is that they stay locked to a given Z height and they won't snap to other things. So this first button here on the far left will set our Z elevation. Now no matter where we set this, so if I set it up here, and now I would start to draw. See, I'm not snapping to anything. But if we look, and that's sitting at that exact elevation of that set of edges that I just clicked once with this set Z-plane tool. So I'm going to undo that. And all we need to do here is set our Z height where we want it, and then we can get in and just make these connections, and we know that they are going to stay locked. So if we had our elevations and we were tracing those, and we're already up in the air, we wanted to add on to something, we could do that pretty easily here. And just make sure I'm on there. And that will work with all of these tools here. So I could use this arc tool. And that would work at that elevation. I could also use the freehand tool. And the only problem with that is it's not going to snap here like the normal freehand tool. So Um, let's see. The line tool will snap there. And we can just go in here and finish off these contour lines. And the only annoying part, obviously, is setting that Z height every time. So a lot of times what I'll do, if there's a lot of contour correction, I'll just flatten everything and draw everything on that one plane, and then I'll go in and raise them back up. So it saves a little bit of a headache there. The other option, if you really wanted to restrict a plane, you can also do that with the work plane, and you could go in and click your points there and double click, and now you've got a work plane set to that specific plane. And I could right click and go to work plane scale, and I could scale that up here as big as I needed it, and I could draw on that plane, and then I could even snap this up here. If I went to work plane move, I could grab this and snap it up to the next height, and do that each time, and then just use the regular SketchUp drawing tools and be able to draw and kind of restrict my drawing to that plane. So that's another option. And with the work plane, it usually works better to work from a lower elevation to a higher elevation, because it's hard to snap coming back down. So because we're restricted here, if I wanted to now grab this and try to snap it down here, it's a little more challenging sometimes to get it to do that. So it seems like it's working okay now. If you turn on X-ray mode, then you're able to really just snap this work plane to any contour you want, and then you can draw right on top of that. So it's a good little tip here when working with contours and wanting to draw your own. And contours do come in handy. They allow you to add that extra details sometimes, to add a ridge where you need it or a berm where you need it. Typically, I try not to use them, and I try to use the terrain patch method as much as I can, and I will use sculpting tools to work out some of the little nuanced things in a terrain, some of the undulations here and there. I will just sculpt them in, or make planar and then soften and smooth things. So that seems to work a little bit better for me, but if you're using contour lines, hopefully some of these tricks come in handy.